I came home early from Toronto, one day ahead of schedule. The house was dark, too dark for a Thursday at 6:40 p.m. Gavin and Savannah were sitting on the couch. No tears, no panic, just waiting. "Dad," Gavin said, rubbing his hands together. "Mom's in the ICU." They said it like they were talking about the weather. At the hospital, I stood beside Irene's bed and listened to a doctor explain that her organs were shutting down, not from illness, but from accumulation. Accumulation doesn't happen overnight. Neither does a $1.2 million life insurance policy, or a $1.7 million family trust set to change beneficiaries in exactly 21 days. I stepped into the hallway, opened my banking app, and froze every account they had access to. 12 minutes later, Gavin's phone buzzed. He turned pale. That's when I noticed something else. Savannah was still holding a small white vitamin bottle with a gold cap. Why bring that to the ICU? Quick note, this is a fictional story with dramatized elements for storytelling and educational value. If you're listening right now, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. And please, take care of your health. Drink water, get rest. Because that bottle in her hand was the moment I realized this wasn't an accident. I'm Malcolm Fraser, 67 years old, an American by choice, but Canadian by birth. I was raised in a small town in Alberta where winters were harsh and men were taught to endure quietly. At 30, I crossed the border with 2 suitcases, a borrowed truck, and a promise to the woman who believed in me more than I believed in myself, Irene. We built everything from nothing. 2 delivery trucks became a logistics company, a rented apartment became a home in Scottsdale, and a shy little boy named Gavin became the center of our universe. Irene taught 2nd grade for 32 years, shaping young minds with patience I never possessed. I was always working, always chasing the next contract, telling myself it was for them. Looking back now, I see the cost of that ambition. Gavin grew up in a beautiful house, but often without his father at the dinner table. He learned independence early, maybe too early. When he became a real estate agent, I was proud, even when the market turned against him. Over the past year, however, something in him changed. The confidence faded. Phone calls went unanswered. Visits became rare. Savannah, his wife, filled that silence. She was attentive, charming, the kind of woman who called Irene Mom from the very beginning. She brought homemade soup, herbal teas, and little bottles of wellness supplements. Irene appreciated the attention, especially after retirement. I did too, at least at first. Standing in the ICU that night, I watched the machines breathe for my wife. The steady rhythm of the ventilator echoed like a metronome counting down something I couldn't yet name. Dr. Elias Monroe spoke calmly, but his words carried weight. "Mr. Fraser, your wife's condition wasn't caused by a sudden illness. There are elevated levels of heavy metals in her system. This suggests prolonged exposure." Prolonged exposure. The phrase lingered in the air long after he left. I stepped into the quiet waiting area where Gavin sat hunched forward, elbows on his knees. Savannah stood near the window, arms folded, her expression unreadable. "Did your mother mention feeling unwell before I left?" I asked. Gavin shook his head. "Just tired, Dad. Savannah's been helping her with vitamins, trying to boost her energy." Savannah nodded gently. "She trusted me. I only wanted to help." Her voice was soft, too soft. I studied their faces, searching for grief, fear, anything human. What I saw instead was tension. Not the kind born from worry, but from anticipation. Later that night, while they went to get coffee, I sat alone beside Irene and held her hand. Her skin felt colder than it should have. I whispered to her, telling her I was home, that she wasn't alone. As I adjusted the blanket, something slipped from the pocket of the chair beside the bed, a small voice recorder. My heart tightened. Irene never carried gadgets unless there was a reason. I pressed play, and through the faint static, her voice emerged, weak but unmistakably clear. If something happens to me, Malcolm, please check the capsules Savannah gives me. Something isn't right. The recording ended. Footsteps approached from the hallway. I quickly slipped the recorder into my coat as Gavin and Savannah re-entered the room. Savannah's eyes flicked briefly to the chair, then back to me. And in that silent exchange, I realized I was no longer just a worried husband. I was a man stepping into a war inside his own family. The next morning, I drove home alone. The desert sky over Scottsdale was pale and empty, like something had been drained out of it. I kept hearing Irene's voice in my head. If something happens to me, check the capsules. That wasn't fear talking. That was certainty. Inside the house, everything looked ordinary. The framed family photos, the polished kitchen island, the quiet hum of the refrigerator. A normal home doesn't prepare you for betrayal. I went straight to the cabinet Savannah used whenever she visited. Third shelf, left side. That's where Irene kept her tea. Behind the tea tins, I found it. A white bottle, gold cap. I didn't open it right away. I just held it in my hand, weighing it like a piece of evidence instead of a supplement. The label said, Natural Mineral Support. No brand name, no barcode. That was the first detail that didn't sit right. I poured a few capsules onto the counter. They looked identical, clean, professional, almost sterile. Too perfect. I sealed them in a plastic bag and drove to a private lab I'd worked with years ago during a shipping contamination issue. Old habits don't disappear when you retire. The technician didn't ask questions. Money speeds up silence. By late afternoon, I had preliminary results. Cadmium, elevated, thallium. Trace amounts, but consistent. Is that accidental? I asked quietly. The technician shook his head. Not at those levels. This builds up over time. Over time? That meant planning. I sat in my truck for a long time after that. I wasn't angry yet. Anger comes later. First comes calculation. Back at the hospital, I found Gavin pacing near the vending machines. Dad, they say Mom's stable for now. For now? I repeated. He looked tired. Not guilty, just tired. His shoulders seemed smaller than I remembered. Are you in trouble financially? I asked. He froze. What? It's a simple question. He rubbed his face. The market's been rough. I'm behind on a few things. How far behind? He hesitated, then barely audible. About 240,000. There it was. A number. Real. Heavy. Savannah stepped out of the elevator at that moment. She saw us standing too close. Her eyes sharpened. Is everything okay? She asked gently. Gavin nodded too quickly. We're fine. Fine. That word again. Later that evening, while they sat with Irene, I accessed the family trust records from my laptop in the waiting room. As primary trustee, I still had full control. I checked recent activity. 3 attempted withdrawals over the past month. Large amounts, all canceled at the final authorization stage. The requests were initiated from Gavin's login, but the IP address wasn't his home network. It traced back to an office building in downtown Scottsdale, the same building where Nolan Briggs had his financial advisory firm. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Nolan had managed portions of our portfolio for 18 months. I trusted him. Irene trusted him more. And suddenly, a memory surfaced. 2 weeks before my trip to Toronto, Irene mentioned wanting to review the beneficiary structure. She didn't say why, just that she felt it was time. If Nolan knew that, then someone else did too. My phone buzzed. A notification from the lab. Full toxicology report attached. I opened it slowly. The accumulation timeline estimated exposure at 5 to 6 weeks. 5 to 6 weeks. That was exactly when Savannah began visiting Irene every afternoon with her wellness routine. I looked up from the report and saw Savannah through the glass wall of the ICU room. She was standing beside Irene's bed, holding her hand, whispering something. From the outside, she looked like devotion. But devotion doesn't hide residue. And as I watched her, I realized something even more unsettling. Gavin might not know how deep this goes, but someone else does. That night, I didn't sleep. Hospitals have a sound of their own, a low, mechanical breathing that never stops. I sat in the corner of Irene's room and watched numbers flicker across a monitor, as if they were trying to tell me something I already knew. By dawn, I had made a decision. I would not accuse anyone, not yet. I drove home before sunrise and pulled the security footage from our garage system. I installed those cameras years ago after a string of break-ins in the neighborhood. Back then, I thought I was protecting property. Now, I was protecting truth. I rewound to 11 days before Irene collapsed. 9:42 p.m. The garage door opened halfway. Not enough to park a car, just enough for someone to slip inside. Savannah stepped in first. She looked over her shoulder, then motioned with her hand. Nolan Briggs followed. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near my house without scheduling a meeting. Financial advisors don't show up at night unless there's a reason. The two of them stood near the storage shelves. The camera had no audio, but body language doesn't need translation. Nolan handed her a small envelope. Savannah nodded, tucked it into her purse, and said something that made him pause. Then they both laughed. Not nervous laughter. Comfortable laughter. I replayed it 3 times. When I arrived at the hospital later that morning, I found Nolan sitting in the waiting area with a bouquet of white lilies. "Malcolm," he said, rising too quickly. "I just heard about Irene. Terrible news." "How did you hear?" I asked calmly. "Gavin mentioned it. I wanted to show support." Support. He placed the flowers on a side table, careful, deliberate. "Have you reviewed the portfolio lately?" he continued. "Given the circumstances, liquidity might be important." Liquidity. There it was again. I studied his face. Nolan was a careful man. Polished. Clean haircut. Crisp shirt even at 8 a.m. "Is there something urgent I should know?" I asked. He smiled. "Only that timing matters." Timing. I watched him leave. No rush, no visible guilt. Inside Irene's room, Gavin stood by the window, staring out at the parking lot. "Did you tell Nolan about the trust amendment?" I asked. He looked confused. "What amendment?" "The one your mother mentioned reviewing." He blinked. "Dad, I don't know anything about that." That answer felt honest. Too honest. Savannah entered moments later with coffee. She handed one to Gavin, one to me. "Any updates?" she asked softly. "Stable," I replied. She exhaled in relief, but her eyes searched my face, measuring something. Later that afternoon, I checked the trust login logs again. 3 attempted transfers, large amounts. Cancelled just before execution. The IP address was Nolan's office, but the authorization code used Gavin's credentials. That meant either Gavin shared access or someone obtained it. I called Deputy Carla Ruiz that evening. "I'm not filing a report yet," I told her, "but I need to know what the threshold is for financial conspiracy tied to attempted poisoning." There was silence on the other end. "That's a serious question, Mr. Fraser," she said. "I know." When I returned to Irene's bedside, she stirred faintly for the first time since I arrived. Her fingers moved against mine. Her eyes opened just a fraction. "Mal," she whispered. "I'm here." She swallowed slowly. "Don't trust the accounts." Her voice faded again. Not, "Don't trust Savannah." Not, "Don't trust Gavin." The accounts. Which meant she knew something about the money. And that meant this wasn't just about capsules anymore. This was about control. And as I stepped back into the hallway, I realized something chilling. Someone had started moving pieces long before Irene ever collapsed. I didn't confront them that night. Instead, I waited. Patience had built my business, and now it would uncover the truth inside my own family. The hospital corridor was quiet, washed in pale fluorescent light. Gavin sat beside me, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor as if answers might appear between the tiles. "Dad," he finally said, his voice low and strained. "Are the accounts really frozen?" I looked at him carefully. There was fear in his eyes, real fear, not for his mother, for himself. "Yes," I replied. "Every account you had access to." He exhaled sharply and ran a hand through his hair. "You didn't have to do that. I can explain." "Then explain," I said calmly. Gavin swallowed. The real estate market collapsed on me. I thought it would recover, but it didn't. I took loans, personal ones. I'm behind on the mortgage. I was just trying to stabilize things until Mom updated the trust. "How much?" I asked. He hesitated, then whispered, 240,000. The number hung between us like a confession. "And Savannah?" I asked. "What does she know?" Gavin looked up, defensive. "She's been helping me. She believes in me, Dad. She's the only one who does." I nodded slowly, though something inside me tightened. Belief can be a powerful weapon in the wrong hands. Savannah approached us moments later, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Her movements were smooth, controlled, almost rehearsed. She handed one to Gavin, then turned to me with a sympathetic smile. "You should get some rest, Malcolm," she said softly. "You've been here all night." "I rest when Irene wakes up," I replied. For a brief second, her smile faltered. Then it returned, perfectly composed. Later that afternoon, I met with Deputy Carla Ruiz in a small consultation room near the ICU. I presented the lab results, the suspicious transactions, and the security footage of Savannah meeting Nolan Briggs in our garage. Ruiz listened without interruption. "This is enough to open a formal investigation," she said. "But we need direct evidence linking the capsules to Savannah and proof of intent." "I'll get it," I answered. When I returned to Irene's room, I noticed Savannah sitting beside her, gently adjusting the blanket. She looked like the picture of devotion. Anyone walking by would have believed she was the perfect daughter-in-law. "Savannah," I said, "can we talk for a moment?" She followed me into the hallway, her posture relaxed. "I'd like to see the supplements you've been giving Irene," I continued. "For the doctors." "Of course," she replied without hesitation. "I'll bring them tomorrow." Too easy. That night, after Gavin and Savannah left, I went back to the house. I searched their bedroom carefully, methodically, drawer by drawer, shelf by shelf. Years of business negotiations had taught me how to look without leaving traces. Inside Savannah's nightstand, I found a folder. Credit card statements, 2 new accounts opened under Gavin's name, large purchases at specialty health stores, and one document that made my breath catch, a signed medical power of attorney form granting Gavin temporary authority over Irene's medical decisions. The signature was Irene's, but the date was just 3 days before her collapse. I photographed everything and returned the folder exactly as I had found it. Back at the hospital before dawn, I sat beside Irene once more. The steady rhythm of the heart monitor filled the room. I took her hand gently. "I'm going to fix this," I whispered. "I promise." As if in response, her fingers twitched slightly, a fragile sign of life and of trust. The next morning, Savannah arrived carrying the familiar white bottle with the gold cap. She handed it to me with a serene smile. "Here you go," she said. "Exactly what Irene has been taking." I accepted it, meeting her gaze. "Thank you." But as she turned away, I noticed something new. a faint white residue on the inside of her purse, the same powdery texture I had seen beneath the capsules. And in that moment, a chilling realization settled in. Savannah wasn't just helping Gavin out of love, she was orchestrating everything. I kept the bottle, not as evidence, not yet, as a reminder. Savannah had handed it to me with such calm confidence that it almost felt like a challenge. People who believe they are untouchable rarely hide their tracks carefully. They rely on perception, on the illusion of innocence. And Savannah had mastered that illusion. That afternoon, I met Deputy Carla Ruiz again, this time bringing the capsules Savannah had provided. She handled the bottle with gloved hands, her expression tightening as she examined the seal. "This will go to the lab immediately," she said. "If the composition matches the toxicology report, we'll have a direct link." "Not yet," I replied quietly. "I want to know who else is involved." Ruiz studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Be careful, Mr. Fraser. People who plan this far ahead don't panic easily." But Savannah did panic. Not visibly, not to anyone else, only to someone watching as closely as I was. That evening, she arrived at the hospital earlier than usual. Her movements were quicker, less graceful. She checked her phone repeatedly, stepping into the hallway to take whispered calls. When she returned to Irene's bedside, she forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Gavin, on the other hand, looked exhausted, emotionally drained rather than guilty. He spent long stretches sitting beside his mother, speaking softly about childhood memories, about fishing trips and school plays Irene never missed. The tenderness in his voice made my chest tighten. Whatever role he played in this, love for his mother was still there, which made everything more tragic. Later that night, I accessed the hospital's visitor logs through a contact in administration. One name appeared repeatedly during the past month: Savannah Fraser. No surprise, but another name surfaced as well: Nolan Briggs. He had visited Irene twice before her collapse. Both visits were brief, under 15 minutes, and neither had been mentioned to me or Gavin. I drove home after midnight, needing space to think. The house felt colder than before, filled with echoes of conversations that now carried new meaning. In Irene's study, I searched her desk more thoroughly. Inside a leather-bound planner, I found a folded document tucked between pages. An internal audit request, dated 2 months earlier. Irene had initiated a review of our financial accounts, specifically those managed by Nolan Briggs. She had written a single note in the margin: "Something doesn't feel right." My hands trembled slightly as I held the paper. Irene had suspected financial manipulation long before the poisoning began. She was gathering evidence, and someone must have discovered that. Someone who realized time was running out. When I returned to the hospital at dawn, Savannah was already there. She stood by the window, staring out at the parking lot. The rising sun cast long shadows across her face, revealing a tension she could no longer conceal. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked. She turned, startled, then forced a small laugh. "Too much on my mind." "Yes," I said softly. "Me too." For a brief moment, silence stretched between us. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and I saw her expression change. Fear, sharp and immediate. She stepped away to answer, speaking in a hushed tone. I couldn't hear every word, but one sentence carried clearly through the quiet hallway. "It's almost done, just a few more days." My pulse slowed rather than quickened. Confirmation often brings clarity instead of shock. I stepped back before she noticed me listening and returned to Irene's room, where Gavin sat holding her hand. "Dad," he said, looking up, "do you think Mom knew something was wrong?" I met his eyes. "Yes, I think she did." At that moment, Irene stirred again. Her eyelids fluttered, and she drew a shallow breath. Gavin leaned forward, hope flashing across his face. "Mom, can you hear me?" Her lips moved slightly. I bent closer, straining to catch her words. Counts. Don't trust. Her voice faded, but the message was unmistakable. Gavin looked at me, confused. What does that mean? Before I could answer, the door opened. Deputy Ruiz stepped inside, her expression serious. The lab confirmed it, she said quietly. The capsules contain toxic levels of heavy metals. We now have enough to pursue charges. Savannah stood frozen in the doorway behind her, having returned just in time to hear every word. And as our eyes met across the room, I realized something chilling. Savannah wasn't afraid of being caught. She was afraid of someone else. Savannah didn't run. That was the first sign she believed she was still in control. When Deputy Carla Ruiz stepped fully into the room and closed the door behind her, the air shifted. Gavin looked from Ruiz to Savannah, confusion turning slowly into dread. I remained seated beside Irene's bed, my hand resting lightly over hers. Steady, patient. The lab confirmed the presence of cadmium and thallium in the capsules, Ruiz said calmly. Savannah, we need you to come with us for questioning. Savannah's eyes flickered, first to Gavin, then to me. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she exhaled slowly, as if releasing a burden she had been carrying for months. Questioning? She repeated softly. Of course. Gavin stood abruptly. Wait, what is this? Savannah, what are they talking about? She turned toward him, her expression shifting into something almost tender. Gavin, I was trying to help us. Help us? His voice cracked. Mom is dying. I watched them, feeling the weight of every decision that had led us here. Gavin's pain was real. Savannah's composure, rehearsed. Ruiz stepped forward. Savannah, you have the right to remain silent. That won't be necessary, Savannah interrupted. She looked directly at me. Malcolm deserves to hear the truth. Silence settled over the room. I didn't start this, she continued. I only accelerated what was already in motion. Gavin shook his head. What are you saying? Savannah's gaze hardened. Your mother was going to remove you from the trust. In 21 days, everything would have changed. You would have been left with nothing. That's not true, Gavin whispered. It is, I said quietly. Your mother initiated the amendment. Savannah nodded. And someone else knew about it, too. My chest tightened. Nolan Briggs. She smiled faintly. Yes, Nolan approached me months ago. He said your family's finances were vulnerable, that Irene was suspicious, that time was running out. He suggested we create urgency. He said once Irene lost capacity, the paperwork would move faster. Gavin staggered back a step, horror dawning across his face. You poisoned my mother? Savannah's eyes glistened, but no tears fell. I administered what Nolan provided. He assured me it would only weaken her temporarily, enough to delay the amendment, nothing more. Ruiz interjected sharply. That substance could have killed her. Savannah finally looked shaken. I didn't know the dosage had been increased. Nolan changed the formulation 3 weeks ago. I confronted him, and he told me it was necessary, that everything was almost done. My mind raced, connecting the timeline, Irene's audit request, Nolan's late-night visit, the attempted transfers. This was never just about inheritance, it was about control of the entire portfolio. Gavin collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. Savannah, how could you? She knelt beside him, reaching out, but he recoiled. I did it for us, she whispered. You were drowning. I was saving our future. I rose slowly, every movement deliberate. You were saving yourself. Savannah looked up at me, and for the first time, fear truly appeared in her eyes. Not fear of prison, but of abandonment. Ruiz stepped closer. Savannah, if you cooperate fully, the district attorney may consider a reduced sentence. That includes providing evidence against Nolan Briggs. Savannah hesitated. Her loyalty shifted visibly, recalculating survival. "If I talk," she said quietly, "I want immunity from attempted murder charges." Ruiz exchanged a glance with me. "That depends on the value of your cooperation." Savannah nodded. "Then I'll tell you everything. Nolan orchestrated the financial transfers, created offshore accounts, and supplied the compounds. I have emails, payment records, and a voice message he left me 2 days ago." Gavin looked up, devastated. "You're going to betray him too?" Savannah's voice turned cold. "He already betrayed me." The room fell silent again, broken only by the steady rhythm of Irene's monitor. I looked down at my wife, fragile yet fighting, and felt a wave of sorrow deeper than anger. This wasn't just a crime, it was the collapse of a family. Ruiz gently placed a hand on Savannah's shoulder. "We'll need that evidence immediately." Savannah nodded. "It's on my phone, and in a cloud backup. I'll give you access." As Ruiz escorted her toward the door, Savannah paused and looked back at me. "Malcolm, I never wanted Irene to die." I met her gaze without emotion. "But you were willing to risk it." She lowered her eyes and walked out. Gavin remained seated, motionless. I placed a hand on his shoulder. He didn't look up. "Dad," he whispered, voice hollow. "What happens now?" I stared through the glass wall of the ICU, where the first light of morning was beginning to spill across the floor. "Now," I said quietly, "we find out how deep Nolan Briggs buried himself in our lives." At that very moment, Deputy Ruiz's voice echoed from the hallway, urgent and sharp. "Malcolm, you need to see this." She held up her phone, the screen displaying a bank alert. A transfer request, $480,000, had just been initiated from one of our offshore linked accounts, and it was authorized using Irene's digital signature. But Irene was still unconscious, which meant only one thing. Nolan Briggs was making his final move. The notification was still glowing on Deputy Carla Ruiz's screen when she handed it to me. $480,000. Pending transfer, authorized with Irene's encrypted digital signature. I stared at the timestamp. 3 minutes ago. Irene lay motionless in the ICU, barely able to open her eyes. Yet somewhere, someone had just used her identity to move nearly $500,000 out of a portfolio she had already questioned months earlier. Gavin stepped closer, his voice shaking. "That's not possible." "No," I said quietly. "It isn't." Ruiz acted fast. Within minutes, she was on the phone with the Financial Crimes Unit, freezing the transaction mid-process. The account was flagged, locked, isolated. I watched her work with the calm precision of someone who had seen families implode before. "This isn't random," she said. "He's accelerating." Nolan Briggs knew the walls were closing in. I stepped out into the hospital parking lot to clear my head. The Arizona heat hit me like a wave, dry and unforgiving. I leaned against my truck and replayed the past few weeks in my mind. Irene requesting an audit, Nolan visiting twice, Savannah increasing the dosage, Gavin drowning in debt. Pieces were falling into place, but there was something else. When I checked the digital authorization log on my phone, I noticed a secondary authentication device listed, an old tablet Irene rarely used. The system showed that the transfer had been initiated from that device. That tablet was at home, locked in her study, which meant Nolan either had remote access or someone inside the house had helped him. I drove there immediately. The house was silent, untouched since I had left that morning. I went straight to Irene's study and found the tablet exactly where it should have been. I powered it on, no sign of manual use, but when I opened the banking app, I saw a recently installed remote access utility hidden within the background processes. Subtle, professional, invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. Nolan hadn't just manipulated accounts, he had embedded himself into our systems. Back at the hospital, Savannah was in a consultation room with Ruiz, signing preliminary cooperation documents. Through the glass panel, I watched her posture, less confident now, but still calculating. Gavin stood beside me, silent. "Did you know about the remote access?" I asked him. He looked horrified. "No, I swear, Dad, I thought we were just buying time." Buying time. That phrase lingered. Gavin hadn't been planning murder. He had been desperate. And Savannah had leveraged that desperation. When Ruiz emerged from the room, she carried a folder and a tight expression. "She's giving us everything," Ruiz said. "Emails, offshore accounts, proof that Nolan supplied the compounds. But there's a complication." "What kind?" I asked. "She claims Nolan altered the formulation without telling her, increased the toxicity." I closed my eyes briefly. If that was true, then Savannah had crossed a line, but Nolan had pushed her beyond it. "And immunity?" I asked. "She's asking for reduced charges in exchange for full cooperation." Gavin looked up sharply. "So she walks away?" Ruiz shook her head. "Not completely, but her sentence would be lighter." Savannah stepped out moments later, her face pale but composed. She avoided Gavin's eyes. "I did what I had to do," she said quietly. "For us." "For you," I replied. She didn't argue. Just then, a nurse rushed down the hallway toward Irene's room. My heart tightened. Gavin followed without thinking. I moved behind him. Inside the ICU, the monitors were shifting, stabilizing rather than declining. Dr. Elias Monroe adjusted settings and then turned toward us. "She's responding," he said. "Her kidney function is improving." Relief hit me harder than anger ever had. I stepped closer to Irene's bed and leaned in. "You're stronger than all of them," I whispered. Her eyelids fluttered. For a brief second, her gaze met mine with clarity. "Mal," she murmured. "I'm here." She struggled to form the next words. "Briggs knew before." "Before what?" Her eyes closed again, but the message was clear enough. Nolan hadn't reacted to the poisoning. He had anticipated it. As I straightened up, Ruiz's phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen and frowned. "What now?" I asked. "The $480,000 transfer wasn't the only one," she replied. "There are 3 smaller transfers already completed over the past 6 weeks, routed through shell companies." My stomach tightened. This wasn't just a desperate act. It was a long-term extraction, and if Nolan was moving money now, he wasn't preparing to defend himself. He was preparing to disappear. Nolan Briggs was not running in panic. He was withdrawing in layers. That realization settled into me as Deputy Carla Ruiz laid out the transaction trail across the small conference table in the hospital's administrative wing. 3 completed transfers, $62,000, $118,000, $95,500. Each routed through consulting retainers tied to shell firms registered in Nevada and Alberta. Alberta. I felt the old pull of home in that word. Cold winters, straight talk, clean books. "This isn't sloppy," Ruiz said. He spaced them out. "Clean timing, clean exits." Gavin sat across from me, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had gone white. He looked younger than his 41 years in that moment. "I didn't know," he repeated again, not defensive now, just hollow. "I believe you," I said quietly, and I meant it. Savannah, seated beside a uniformed officer, was calmer than before, but not steady. There was a tremor in her fingers she couldn't suppress. She had agreed to cooperate formally. A written statement was already being drafted. "I can get you access to the offshore account keys," she said. "Nolan kept redundant credentials in a vault box under an LLC name." "Which one?" Ruiz asked. "Blue Cedar Holdings." The name meant nothing to me. But Ruiz's eyebrows lifted slightly. She typed quickly into her tablet. It's linked to a private air charter service out of Scottsdale. Gavin looked up sharply. He has a plane? Not directly, Ruiz replied, but he's booked flights before. I checked my watch. It was 3:17 p.m. How soon can someone leave the country? I asked. Ruiz didn't sugarcoat it. If he planned ahead, he could be airborne within hours. Savannah swallowed hard. He told me last week that if things got complicated, he had options. I thought he meant legal options. I studied her face. She wasn't acting now. This was fear. Dr. Elias Monroe entered briefly with an update. Irene's vitals were stabilizing further, kidney markers trending down, liver function beginning to respond to chelation therapy. She's fighting, he said gently. I placed a hand on Irene's blanket when he left. Her breathing was shallow, but more even than before. Stay with me, I murmured. Then my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I stepped into the hallway and answered. Malcolm? The voice was unmistakable. Nolan. Where are you? I asked, keeping my tone level. You always were direct, he said lightly. I respect that. You poisoned my wife. A pause. No, he corrected calmly. Your daughter-in-law administered what she believed was a reversible compound. Dosage drift can happen. Rage moved through me like a low current, but I kept it contained. You altered it, I said. Silence again, then a faint exhale. I adjusted variables. For what? For inevitability, he replied. Irene was dismantling everything. Years of infrastructure. You built that portfolio with discipline. She was going to scatter it to charity boards that wouldn't understand its structure. That wasn't your decision to make. It became mine when Gavin signed limited authority access. I felt the air thin. He what? Nolan continued smoothly. 6 months ago, under financial stress, he granted temporary operational privileges so I could restructure liquidity. Gavin had never mentioned that. You exploited him. I leveraged opportunity. I closed my eyes briefly. Where are you, Nolan? He chuckled softly. You won't reach me in time. Behind me, I saw Ruiz approaching. I put the call on speaker without breaking stride. Federal agents are monitoring all outgoing charters, Ruiz said calmly, loud enough for him to hear. Another pause. You think small, Nolan replied. Planes are obvious. A cold realization crept in. He's not leaving by air, Ruiz whispered. Savannah suddenly stood from her chair, face drained of color. He has a maritime fallback, she said. A 42-foot cruiser docked at Lake Havasu, registered under a numbered trust. Ruiz reacted instantly, barking orders into her radio. On the phone, Nolan's voice shifted, less amused now. You shouldn't have told them that, Savannah. I'm done protecting you, she shot back, louder than I'd ever heard her speak. There it was, the fracture. Nolan exhaled slowly. Loyalty is expensive, and you just defaulted. The line went dead. Within minutes, Ruiz confirmed coordination with federal authorities, Lake Patrol, border surveillance, all activated. Gavin stood frozen in the hallway. Dad, he whispered, voice cracking. I signed that document. I thought it was temporary. I placed a hand on his shoulder. You were drowning, I said, and someone offered a rope. But it was tied to a rock. Yes. Savannah looked between us, tears finally spilling freely. I didn't think he'd go this far, she said. He promised it would only delay the amendment. You believed a man who profits from delay, I replied. Another call came in, this time to Ruiz. She listened. Her expression hardened. What? I asked. They found the cruiser, she said quietly. Untethered, engine warm, but Nolan Briggs wasn't on board. A chill moved through me. Where is he? Gavin asked. Ruiz shook her head. His phone just pinged from a cell tower less than 5 miles from here. 5 miles, near the hospital. Which meant Nolan Briggs hadn't run. He had come closer, and if he was that close, he wasn't escaping. He was finishing something. 5 miles. That was all the distance between the man who engineered my wife's poisoning and the hospital room where she was fighting to breathe. Deputy Carla Ruiz moved fast. Within minutes, uniformed officers sealed the hospital's main entrances. Security teams were posted at stairwells, elevators, parking levels. The tension in the hallway thickened, quiet, controlled, but razor-sharp. "He's not here to talk," Ruiz said under her breath. "He's here to erase risk." Erase risk. I looked toward Irene's ICU door. "She's the risk," I said quietly. Gavin inhaled sharply. "You think he'd—" "Yes," I replied. "If she wakes fully lucid, she can testify. She can confirm the amendment. She can describe the audit." Savannah pressed both hands against her face. "He wouldn't hurt her directly. That draws too much attention." "He already poisoned her," I said. "Attention doesn't frighten him. Exposure does." Ruiz received another update through her earpiece. "Cell signal just moved," she said. "Parking structure, level 2. I didn't wait for permission. I moved. "Dad!" Gavin called after me. "Stay with your mother," I said firmly. "Do not leave her side." The parking garage was dim and hot. The air smelled of oil and sun-baked concrete. Officers moved in coordinated silence between rows of vehicles. Ruiz caught up beside me. "You should not be down here," she said. "He came because of me," I replied. "I want him to see that I'm not hiding." We heard it then, a car door closing. Not hurried, not panicked, deliberate. 2 rows over, a gray rental sedan sat idling. The driver's door opened slowly. Nolan Briggs stepped out. He wore a light linen jacket, as if this were a business lunch. Calm, measured. His expression carried no trace of fear. "You're late," he said to Ruiz casually. "I expected federal response 15 minutes ago." "Hands where I can see them," she ordered. He complied, but smiled faintly. "You're escalating this unnecessarily," Nolan said. "Malcolm and I were simply going to discuss risk mitigation." "Mitigation?" I repeated. "For your legacy," he said smoothly. "Irene's emotional decisions were dismantling years of disciplined growth. I offered stability. You offered arsenic," I said. "Cadmium and thallium," he corrected coolly. "Measured." Ruiz stepped closer. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit attempted homicide and financial fraud." Nolan's gaze shifted briefly to the officers now surrounding him. "And if I cooperate?" he asked. "That depends on what you provide," Ruiz replied. He looked back at me. "Malcolm," he said quietly, "you know I built systems that outlive panic. Even now, contingency triggers are active." "What triggers?" I demanded. He smiled slightly. "You locked accounts. Very prudent. But when Irene's biometric signature fails 3 consecutive confirmation requests, a fail-safe transfer initiates." Cold ran through me. "When?" Ruiz pressed. "Midnight," he said calmly. 6 hours from now." "To where?" He tilted his head. "You'll find out." Ruiz signaled officers forward. Handcuffs clicked into place around his wrists. But Nolan did not resist. As they guided him toward a patrol vehicle, he spoke one last sentence. "I never intended Irene to die," he said. "Only to be temporarily incapable." "You miscalculated," I answered. "No," he replied softly. "I recalibrated." He was placed in the back seat, the door shut. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at the reflection in the tinted window. My own face, older than it had been yesterday. Back inside the hospital, Gavin met me halfway down the corridor. "They caught him?" he asked. "Yes." "And the money?" "Still frozen." Savannah was seated again under supervision. She looked up as I approached. "He'll talk," she said quietly. He always protects himself first. You should remember that, I replied. Hours passed. Ruiz returned just before evening. He confirmed the fail-safe transfer, she said, but he claims he no longer controls it. How convenient, I muttered. We need Irene conscious enough to override biometric authorization before midnight, Ruiz added. Otherwise, the system interprets non-response as incapacitation. I went to Irene's bedside. Her breathing was steadier now, eyes flickering beneath closed lids. Irene, I said softly, leaning close. I need you to wake up. For several seconds, nothing. Then her fingers twitched against mine, her eyelids lifted halfway. Mal, she whispered. I'm here. Her gaze struggled to focus. Tablet, study drawer, red file. What red file? I asked urgently. Manual override code, she breathed. In case Nolan ever... Her voice faded again. I looked at Ruiz. Red file, I repeated. Gavin had already grabbed his keys. I'll get it, he said. As he ran toward the elevators, I felt the clock tightening around us. Midnight was coming, and somewhere inside Nolan's system, a countdown was already in motion. Midnight came with a silence that felt heavier than any storm. Gavin returned just in time, breathless, clutching the red file Irene had hidden years ago. Inside was a handwritten override code, simple, precise, unmistakably hers. With Deputy Carla Ruiz and Dr. Elias Monroe present, we entered the code into the secure banking system minutes before the fail-safe transfer could activate. The countdown stopped. The remaining funds were permanently frozen under federal order. Nolan Briggs's network of shell accounts began collapsing one by one as authorities traced his operations. By morning, formal charges were filed: attempted homicide, financial fraud, and conspiracy. He would spend the rest of his life facing the consequences of a mind that mistook control for intelligence. Savannah cooperated fully. Her testimony dismantled Nolan's financial architecture and revealed the depth of manipulation that had ensnared our family. She received a reduced sentence, though freedom would not come easily or soon. Gavin, devastated but resolute, accepted responsibility for the authority he had unknowingly granted. In time, he filed for divorce and began the long process of rebuilding his life, this time with humility rather than pride. And Irene, she survived. Recovery was slow, marked by fragile mornings and determined afternoons. The woman who once managed complex portfolios now celebrated the simple victory of walking unassisted down a hospital corridor. We transferred the majority of our assets into a charitable foundation she had envisioned, one dedicated to supporting victims of financial exploitation and elder abuse. It was her way of transforming betrayal into purpose. As for me, I learned that the most dangerous threats rarely come from strangers. They emerge quietly, wrapped in familiarity, patience, and trust. Revenge, I discovered, is not always about destruction. It is about truth, accountability, and protecting what remains sacred. If this story resonated with you, even for a moment, I would be honored to hear from you. Thank you for watching and sharing this journey with me today. Please let me know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is there right now. I truly enjoy seeing how far these stories travel. And if you stayed until the very end, I invite you to rate this story from 1 to 10. Your feedback helps me create even more powerful and meaningful stories for you. Please note, this story contains fictionalized elements created for educational, entertainment, and reflective purposes. If this story moved you in any way, another story is waiting for you on your screen right now. YouTube believes you will enjoy it, so sit back and experience the next journey.